In the 6th month of Elizabeth's pregnancy, God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth, a town in Galilee, to a virgin pledged to be married to a man named Joseph, a descendant of David. The virgin's name was Mary. The angel went to her and said, "Greetings, you who are highly favored. The Lord is with you." Mary was greatly troubled at his words and wondered what kind of greeting this might be. But the angel said to her, "Do not be afraid, Mary. You have found favor with God. You will conceive and give birth to a son, and you are to call him Jesus. He will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High. The Lord will give him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over Jacob's descendants forever. His kingdom will never end." "How will this be," Mary asked the angel, "since I am a virgin?" The angel answered, "The Holy Spirit will come on you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. So the Holy One to be born will be called the Son of God. Even Elizabeth, your relative, is going to have a child in her old age, and she who was said to be unable to conceive is in her 6th month. For no word from God will ever fail." "I am the Lord's servant," Mary answered. "May your word to me be fulfilled." And then the angel left her. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. You can have a seat, family. Do not be afraid, Mary. You have found favor with God. What's to be afraid of? Isn't the favor of God supposed to be a good thing? Well, in Mary's case, the favor of God meant pregnancy with God, and that was problematic on a whole number of levels. First, relationally, this divine favor is going to make things pretty complicated with our fiancé. I mean, what are the odds Joseph's going to buy the whole, "Yes, I'm pregnant, but God's the dad" story? Socially, pregnancy outside of wedlock was a major faux pas in first century Israel. Mary's family would likely disown her. She'll be the talk of the village in the very worst way. She's just been cloaked in shame that she will never outrun. And then, of course, there's the legal matter. In Mary's ancient world, pregnancy outside of wedlock was a criminal offense to the tune of the death penalty. So when the angel said, "Do not be afraid, Mary, you have found favor with God," he was really saying something like, "Mary, you have been vested with the divine privilege of God writing you as a cast member into his redemption drama, and it'll cost you absolutely everything you thought was yours. Your entire life. It'll mean walking right through a dense thicket of fear, but on the other side of that fear lies life so full and so free that worth it is far too small a phrase to even begin to do it justice." Hold that thought. Historically and even globally in the church today, the church celebrates Christmas, not in one worship gathering, but 3 distinct worship services, at midnight, at dawn, and then at mid-morning. So the church across the globe tonight and into tomorrow morning will gather at dark, at dawn, and at day. And while pulling a Christmas Eve all-nighter is a bit extreme for my taste, I do like the symbolism of that. Because belief, in my experience, comes a whole lot like the beginning of a new day. It is gradual, not definitive. Like, when precisely did the sun rise this morning? It's hard to say, right? Because a hazy kind of light gradually transforms the pitch black night sky into a faint gray, and then it slowly paints it in oranges, yellows, and pinks until the sky is lit up in blue and the earth goes from dark to alive in color again. When today did dark become dawn? And when exactly did dawn become day? It's very difficult to define in the present while we're experiencing it, but it's so obvious and plain in hindsight, easy for us to say. There was a time when it was dark and then it was day, and now it's become dark again. And belief works a lot like that. Occasionally, the sun rises like a fireball that transforms the darkness into light all at once. And sure, occasionally, belief does just knock someone on their back, turning their whole life around in a single instant. And those stories are the ones that get all the press, and I get it. They're good stories. But more often, belief is gradual. It's a slow play. It's the long con, like the rising of the sun. Gradual, hazy, hard to name definitively in any one moment, but obvious in hindsight. And I'd like to tell you the Christmas story tonight that way, the way we actually experiencing it, according to dark, dawn, and day. Let's begin in the dark. In those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire Roman world. This was the first census that took place while Quirinius was the governor of Syria, and everyone went to their own town to register. So Luke frames the birth of Jesus within the reign of Herod under the authority of Caesar Augustus during a census that Quirinius was spreadsheeting. And that means that the supernatural events that follow are grounded in history in a verifiable time and place. Luke is making the claim that all that follows, the Immaculate Conception, the choir of angels, the birth of God as one of us, all of it is news, not parable, fable, or fairy tale. And that's important because news is a certain kind of communication. It is a declaration of past factual events that you can react to in the present however you choose. Take the COVID-19 pandemic, for example. Too soon? I wasn't sure. Might still be too soon. Anyway, there's an invisible disease ravaging the whole globe. That was the news. So you could lock yourself inside for a couple of years, or you could wear a mask when walking into a restaurant, but then take it off when you sit down at the table, where we're all going to keep breathing, pretending that that makes you responsible and safe and protected. Or you could view the whole thing as a government-invented hoax and lick every doorknob you come across. News is a declaration of fact, events that have already happened, and news is the present notification of past factual events. You're free to respond to those events however you choose, but your response won't change the facts. And that, says Luke, is what the birth of Jesus Christ is. God himself has become one of us, born of divine conception to peasant parents in a village called Bethlehem during a Roman-ordered census. How are you going to respond to that news report? I guess in one hand, it may seem to you entirely absurd to vest your trust in the belief that the birth of an illegitimate Jewish peasant in a rural village a couple thousand years ago is the decisive event in all of history. That he, this child, is the one to whom all spirituality, philosophy, science, and academia point, that he is the meaning of life itself, and that only in relationship to him does my life take on any coherent meaning. Yes, surely that is absurd. And at the very same time, to approach that event smugly with my arms crossed, this event that has improbably defined history like no other, that somehow the birth of this illegitimate Jewish peasant in that rural village became the event that to this day divides our calendars, measures the span of our lives, and commands the worship of more human beings than any other event in human history, that this person who never wrote a book or received a diploma or held an office or ruled a nation or won an award, somehow that person became unquestionably the most influential person to ever grace this planet, that somehow his name and legacy far exceeded and outlasted the legacies of Herod and Caesar and Quirinius. Surely to sit smugly with my arms crossed, certain that the decisive event that has arrested human history like no other, and the decisive person whose life has shaped history like no other, is quickly and easily dismissible without any serious consideration. The assumption that my vantage point is sure enough, my academic prowess enlightened enough to debunk all of that with nothing more than a smirk and a shrug, surely that is at least equally as absurd. So look, here's a news report, says Luke, and you're free to do with this news whatever you'd like. You can yawn and change the channel. You can live in denial of it. You can accept it blindly without critically thinking, or you can go to the crime scene and take a look for yourself. But what I'm giving you, it's not once upon a time. This is not an allegory, and it's not a fairy tale. It is news. And that takes us from the dark to the dawn, picking up exactly where we left off in Luke chapter 2. So Joseph also went up from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to Bethlehem in the town of David, because he belonged to the house and line of David. Luke takes us from an emperor in Rome to a governor in Syria to a man without a title from a nowhere town in Nazareth. And from there, the story follows the powerless man from the nowhere town. Why? Well, because of where he happened to be going, Bethlehem, and because of who he happened to be associated with. He belonged to the house and line of David. Now, that's a tell that would be obvious to any ancient Israelite. I mean, it's a short way of saying something that would upload a whole backstory into the Israelite imagination. It's a little bit like if I were to just go, Kevin, at a Christmas Eve service in modern day America. Right, all I did was say a common first name, but you had an entire story flashed to your mind about Fuller's bedwetting and Buzz's girlfriend and Mr. McAllister's apparently wildly lucrative career. I mean, seriously, Paris for the entire extended family? Have you thought about that? Back to Luke. Any Torah-educated Jew reading Luke's story immediately would have had 1 Chronicles 17 flash to their mind, because that is a story in which God promised a son in David's line to be born in the rural village of Bethlehem who would sit on David's throne forever, ruling a kingdom that would never end. Luke is telling us that real ordinary things are happening in the world. Israel at this point in history is a Roman-occupied territory. Population control is one way they make sure power stays on the side of Rome. A census is just business as usual. The powerless are being inconvenienced and battered around by the powerful, leading to migration from Nazareth for Joseph, where he settled, back to Bethlehem, his hometown, while his wife is full-term pregnant. Luke is telling us that story, only he's telling us that story in such a way as to say, but the divine purpose beneath this census is really just to get Mary and Joseph to Bethlehem on the night that the child's going to be born. You see, the real thing going on here is that God is conspiring to keep his oldest promises. Augustus might be today's ruler on earth, but he's nothing more than a pawn in the plot of heaven. Luke is tugging on a past prophecy, and he's hinting at a future promise in a way that is obvious to those reading the story in his time and culture, but is lost in translation on most of us. And that is how the Christmas story, every last part of it, is written. It's past prophecy joined to future promise. We got one foot in both, but we're not living entirely in either one. And in that way, it's a little bit like the dawn. It's not dark anymore, but it's not full-blown daylight either. It's a hazy kind of gray where light is slowly illuminating the world, but not plainly enough to light it up with color. But like dawn, of course, that gray does promise that full color is coming and coming soon. And the Christmas story, every last turn of phrase that Luke uses, it's written in this dawn-breaking kind of way. So we might as well just cut right to the main event, which goes like this. Today in the town of David, a Savior has been born to you. He is the Messiah, the Lord, and this will be a sign to you. You will find a baby wrapped in swaddling clothes and lying in a manger. Swaddling clothes and a manger. Those are two more ancient tells. They're two more Kevin kind of moments, uploading a whole story into the Israelite imagination. Swaddling clothes, that's what Mary and Joseph wrapped Jesus in, and it's what the angels told the shepherds to keep an eye out for. And that's because swaddling clothes, according to Ezekiel chapter 16, were the garments of a beloved child. Swaddling clothes were an ancient Jewish symbol of parents declaring a child beloved before that child has done a single thing to earn their belovedness. He or she, simply by relationship, is deeply and entirely loved. And at Jesus' baptism, which Luke jumps to in the very next chapter, God's voice interrupts the whole event to declare Jesus a beloved son before he uttered a word of teaching or recruited a single disciple or worked a single miracle. Before he did a thing to earn his belovedness. You are my son, whom I love, and with you I am well pleased. Belovedness as a gift of relationship, and by relationship alone. You're going to find a child who is named Beloved, and you'll know that because he's wrapped in swaddling clothes. And where will you find him? He'll be lying in a manger. A manger is a feeding trough for animals. What kind of animals? Well, both sheep and pigs. Sheep, a dominant biblical metaphor for the Israelite people, and pigs, an equally prevalent symbol for the Gentile people, the nations. According to Isaiah chapter 25, God was going to bring about a ruler to whom all people, all nations will gather as one family for a great unending feast. And this Jesus, the child laid in a feeding trough, he would one day gather all nations, all people on a mountainside and feed 5,000 of them. His life would end with him breaking bread and saying, "This bread is my body broken for you." He declared, "I am the bread of life." The one who will become bread to satisfy the hunger of all people is born and laid in a feeding trough. Do you see what's going on here? It's a past prophecy that also hints at a future promise. It's like dawn breaking the dark, a sure sign to us that the full day is coming. So listen, man, if the Christmas story is written this way, if it's all charged with all this coded reference, why code it at all? I mean, why didn't Luke just come right out and say it exactly like he meant it? Well, because these grand claims are also written in such a way that demands personal involvement. So here is how the Christmas story is very intentionally written to me and you. It is past prophecy joined to future promise in a way that presently demands my personal involvement. Symbolized through the first unlikely witnesses who gather to behold God in the flesh, the shepherds and the Magi, who risk personal involvement and are then thrust into this story in three distinct ways. You will find, you will return, and you will become. You will find a baby wrapped in swaddling clothes and lying in a manger. That's what the angels told them. One of the interesting parts of the Christmas story that's probably only noticed by the particularly curious or skeptical is that there are minor discrepancies between what the angels tell the shepherds they're going to find and what they actually roll up on at the nativity. There's a few minor details that are different in the way the angels describe the scene to the shepherds and the specific details of the scene that they actually encounter. The exact match, though, the identical description, is about the child himself. It's about Jesus, who is exactly who the angel said he would be. But what do we make of those little surrounding discrepancies? Like, is this just sloppy writing? Doubtful. I mean, Luke has been so intentional with every last syllable up to this point. More likely, this is actually an intentional literary device, a way of continuing to tell the story, writing it in the way that it's experienced as a motif for the experience of belief. Because belief is the reward of those who are willing to go searching. The shepherds are not told by the angels, just have faith. They're not indoctrinated or manipulated. They don't ask them to swallow a story whole or to check their intellect at the door or to entrust the complex reality of their actual lives to some abstract set of oversimplified ideas. No, they invite them to go and see for themselves. You will find. And belief is a hard-won reward reserved for those who are willing to go searching. But belief is also not something that crosses every T and dots every I. It doesn't answer every last question or immediately resolve every tension that I carry. When the shepherds arrived at the scene, there were discrepancies. There were still questions worth asking and tensions that needed to be navigated and legit cause for more searching and finding. But Jesus, the infinite King who humbled himself as a child, he was exactly who they said he was. Meaning, to find Jesus as Lord is not to have every question answered, and it's not to be done searching altogether. But it is to discover one who is worth trusting, worshiping, and following in the ongoing journey of belief. There were discrepancies, but Jesus was every bit who they said he was, and that's what belief actually feels like. I don't trust in Jesus because I believe the Christmas story. I believe the Christmas story because I trust in Jesus. Because in Jesus, I found one who really does forgive my wrongs and heal my wounds. In Jesus, I have found one who really does answer prayer and put the world back together the way it should be. In Jesus, I have found a friend who will walk beside me on the brightest days and the darkest nights alike. And that's what belief means. It means keep on asking your questions, but ask them in humble surrender and daily relationship to the God who is humble enough to become like you, seeking exactly that relationship with you. And the same thing holds for the Magi. You know, somewhere along the way in history, this rumor started to spread that there was these 3 wise men who showed up right alongside the shepherds the night Jesus was born, and it didn't actually go down like that. In truth, a group of magi who were steeped in an astrological spirituality in a totally different culture felt God speak to them in their spiritual language, the stars in the night sky, that sent them on a journey that lasted about 2 years before they found Jesus. And I think it's really important that we preserve the truth of their story, because the Magi had a divine encounter one night that sent them on a spiritual search, and it was a long and winding 2 steps forward and 1 step back, finding my way and then losing it, indirect and wandering sort of spiritual search, but it was a search that ended at Jesus. And that means that if you find yourself there on a search that is a whole lot less direct than his or hers, a search that might have started for you in a far-off place and has a setback or 2 within it and involves getting lost at least as many times as you thought you knew where you were going, that doesn't mean that you're doing something wrong. The way Jesus was found first was only indicative of the way that he's found today. No 2 journeys are alike. Some happen in a single night and others over the course of years. There is no one route, but there is one Lord. Jesus and only Jesus. And it's not necessary to verify every last detail in order to receive this good news that will cause great joy. What is necessary is Jesus. Only Jesus is Savior and Lord. Everything else is discovered and rediscovered on the journey ahead, but Jesus himself is the beginning of the journey. Speaking of the Magi, Matthew says, they returned to their country by another route. So you will find and you will return. The Magi met Jesus, and they didn't leave their lives behind. They didn't abandon their culture and their families and their history and their unique identity and become Jews. They returned home. But they didn't return by the same route. In other words, they didn't go back the same way. And the shepherds did the same. They didn't go back to the fields from the manger. They went ahead to the village. And you know, I think that this little detail tells us so much about the heart of God, that a message that was first announced to the world in the harmony of an angelic choir is now going to be heard by all the rest of us through the rural dialect of night shift shepherds and the foreign accent of Arabian astrologers. Jesus did not entrust his message first to the priests in the temple or the rulers in the palace or the scribes in the schools. No, it was not to the pious or the powerful or the qualified that Jesus made his appeal, but to those courageous enough or desperate enough to take the risk of searching and finding. And here was their reward. They returned as themselves. They held on to their unique God-imprinted identity and personhood that they had always known. They were still themselves, but they also didn't return the same way. Because no one who encounters Jesus goes back exactly the same way that they came. Maybe you're compelled by Jesus, but you're repelled by his followers. And I get that. The loudest of them are perpetuating a false reputation for a whole lot of us, but that's actually nothing new. It's just God taking the same astounding risk on us that he's always taken. You don't get the beauty of the shepherds and the Magi without some tragic misrepresentation here or there. What I do know for sure is that the way God arrived demanded that he not just to be a spectacle to behold from a safe distance, but that he was a spectacle to be held in the inner life of every last one who's willing to go searching for him. And that's the last piece of this whole equation, the scariest and best part, the personal involvement. You will become. Those who find Jesus also find themselves, and they find themselves as God created them before this world of lies and disguises had a chance to convince them to forget who they are. When I discover Jesus as beloved, I discover that I too am the beloved of God. I am accepted, welcomed, loved, not after a set of qualifications or accomplishments, but here and now as I am today in my current condition, beloved based on relationship, not merit. It's the love of God that changes me, not certain changes I might make that gives me the love of God. And discovering Jesus as the bread of life to whom I feast and am satisfied then transforms my life into that same kind of bread. My life actually becomes a feast that satisfies the hunger of others. Jesus doesn't just rescue us from our pitfalls and wounds. He definitely does that. But even more than that, he then thrusts upon us a consequential role in the ongoing renewal of the world. Like the shepherds and Magi before us, he charges our humble lives with the power of heaven to remake this world into the perfectly loved and perfectly whole place he made it first. As Athanasius said so simply and poetically back in the 3rd century, God became man so that man might become a God. God did not come to the earth to rescue you and I so that we could go to some far-off heavenly place one day. God came to the earth so that you might become the meeting point between heaven and earth, so that your ongoing life on the earth might restore this place into the good and very good place that he made it first. And so with all of that in mind, rewind 9 months. Do not be afraid, Mary. You have found favor with God. That's what the angel said, but it's not all the angel said. In fact, it's not even the first thing. Luke 1:28. The angel went to her and said, "Greetings, you who are highly favored. The Lord is with you." This world of ours, it came apart at the seams when a fallen angel told a woman a lie about God and herself. That's Genesis chapter 3. This world was mended exactly where it came apart when the heavenly angel told a different woman the truth about God and herself. That's Luke chapter 1. And the truth about God sounds like this: the Lord is with you. And he is with Mary more intimately than she or anyone else ever dared imagine that God might be with them, not just with her, but even within her. And the truth about herself sounds like this: greetings, you who are highly favored. You peasant at the bottom rung without status. You woman without power in a patriarchal society. You rural Nazarene with no access. You pregnant and soon to be scandalized by the whole village. Your name in the kingdom that's going to outlast all of that is highly favored. You see it, don't you? The way the angel's writing the story. This angel speaking to Mary is tugging on a past prophecy, the core problem of the human condition, the serpent's deception that God promises to personally redeem all the way back on the first page. But he's tugging on that prophecy in a way that hints at a future promise. The child that you are pregnant with tonight is going to become all of that, and right now is the time, and that demands personal involvement from you. And it's because of that last part, the scariest and best part, the personal involvement, that the angel continues, "Do not be afraid, Mary." Because for Mary, light is breaking the dark, but not all at once, more in this hazy gray dawn kind of way. And for her, to be filled with the life of God is going to come at a very personal cost. And so she is being personally addressed by name by God himself. And Mary is only the first in a long line of people indwelled with the presence of the living God. And for every last one of them, for every last one of us, it feels pretty much exactly like it felt for her. Extraordinary privilege and unthinkable risk being thrust upon me simultaneously. No doubt some will be sitting here this evening weighing that very same privilege and risk. Because in spite of what you expected or didn't, you are having a dawning light sort of moment this Christmas Eve that could only properly be called an encounter with the God of love. And that sort of thing, it doesn't answer every question you've got or clear up every discrepancy in your story, but it does show you Jesus as he really is, Jesus even better than advertised. But of course, alongside that unique privilege, there's also this unthinkable risk. Risk that goes something like, I've spent my entire life mocking my family for this story, and to swallow it now, even part of it, well. Or I can take Jesus, sure, I could be associated with him, but not him, not her, not them. Or my heart might want to leap out of my chest, but I also can't bear the weight of what I'd have to give up, or what I'd have to take on, what I'd have to admit, or what I'd have to withhold. Insert your story here. Everyone who's ever found Jesus has had to walk through unthinkable risk to get there. And everyone who has ever swallowed hard and looked at that dense thicket of fear in front of them and walked right through it has on the other side of it found life so full and so free that worth it is far too small a phrase to even begin to do it justice. So tonight, on this Christmas Eve, I wonder if all of heaven might be thundering your name. Do not be afraid, because he really is the fulfillment of every past prophecy. He really is the one who is a yes to every future promise, and his invitation for your personal involvement might involve risk, but it is the best invitation you will ever receive.